And to all of our sponsors, you'll see in the book, we were really, really blessed to have these great sponsors, which is allowing us to make this open to the public and not charge admission. And also, we're going to give a nice donation to this group, Love Your Melon. The Connecticut chapter of Love Your Melon, it's a group that gives young kids who are suffering from cancer hats. And Tom Mahoney, who is our director of referees, his daughter started the Connecticut chapter, the Yukon chapter. So he came to us and we said, hey, let's contribute some money there. So the sponsors are enabling us to do that tonight. So thank you very much. Okay. I first started listening to Rick Wolff about 12, 13 years ago. Sunday morning show called The Sports Edge on WFAN at 8 o'clock. And it was usually when I was driving up to Weston Basketball, to the high school to play basketball. And I would catch like 10, 15 minutes of it, and then I started listening to the podcast. Rick's show is always compelling. It's consistently interesting. And although I don't think Rick would object to me calling him a bit of an old school gentleman, he's not a curmudgeon. He cares. And he's now, oh, in my day, we used to, like, he brings people together. There's always great guests, and I think he cares about the issues surrounding youth sports and youth parenting. And I really, really appreciate him being here tonight. So without further ado, everyone, please welcome to the stage, Rick Wolff.
I'm an old baseball guy primarily, and pitchers and catchers report, I guess, today. So the idea of going out when it's 2 degrees and the wind's howling is not my idea of a good time. So, and I also wasn't aware that there was a height requirement to be on the stage. 6'5"?
That's 6'6".
6'6". 6'7". So I'm the little guy. Anyhow, thank you for the fine introduction. It was very, very nice. I've been doing my sports parenting show on The Fan for about 16 years. It's especially in the wintertime, it's always a challenge. I'm over in Westchester County, and when the weather forecasters call for snow Saturday night into Sunday morning, I always go nuts because that means the roads are going to be terrible and it's going to take an extra 2 hours to get down to the station. The station's way downtown on 345 Hudson Street. Now this forecast for this weekend, the same thing, so we'll see. But anyhow, let me give you a little background on how I got involved in this. Because when I was growing up, and again, I'm one of the old guys, old school. I grew up in a time, I grew up in Scarsdale. I can't recall my father, my mother ever going to any of my games when I was a kid, from elementary school to middle school. I think one time my dad came to one baseball game, and then they came obviously in high school, but primarily to the varsity games. They didn't go to JV games. It just wasn't done. No parent did that. And if there was ever a problem that you had, with a coach, and you went home and you groused about it at the dinner table with your parents, they always took the coach's side. That's how it was in those days. And if you have a problem, Rick, with your playing time or something, then you stand your own 2 feet and you go and you talk to coach on your, make that happen, because we're not going to go complain on your behalf. There were no such things as helicopter parents, and it was just a different time, different place, and it's a cliche, which is the sort of the theme of the show tonight, was we really did play because it was fun, and there weren't any parents, and the parents were supportive, but only at the time you get to the varsity level, and there was no. Yeah, there was some recruiting going on for college, but it was sort of haphazard. This is, of course, again, prehistoric times before the internet had been invented. And, you really played for fun. It was fun for you and your friends. And at the end of the day, when the sun went down, you went home, you just you dissolved your pickup teams and went on your way. Totally different today. Anyhow, I guess it was in the early 90s. I was working with the Cleveland Indians as the roving sports psychology coach. And at that point, my wife and I, we had 3 kids, and they were just starting out getting a feel for youth sports. And I was always curious, as to what was happening, because I kept hearing these horror stories about pushy parents and win at all costs kinds of coaches. And I had studied, I'd go to Harvard, and I'd studied psychology there, and I played pro baseball after my years at Harvard. And I went around to every guy in spring training working for the Indians in like 90, 91. And all these guys, no matter where they grew up in the States, they all said that they had seen these kind of ridiculous situations with parents being very, very aggressive and making sure the kids got the best teams and so on and so forth. And this is sort of the first start I'd heard of pushy parents, pushy sports parents. So I did a lot of research and went to a book, and before you knew it, I thought this would just be like a momentary or, it passed in a few months. Suddenly, I found myself being asked to speak on radio and TV shows about sports and sports parenting, and if you heard about this incident, how about this and that, and I've been doing this ever since. I did a number of articles for Sports Illustrated on youth sports, and that led to the show and the Fan. So that's the background. That's how I got here. But I'm always amazed at what happens. It's different time, different place, and it's out of control. Okay.
So let's, thanks Rick, let's talk about tonight. So the title on the program, right, is are we taking the fun out of youth sports, and if so, why? And so there's a couple of assumptions underneath that. One is that there's some idealized youth sports experience out there that we are preventing our kids from having, or that we, coaches, parents, league presidents, AAU coaches, whomever there are, that because we're so concerned about winning and competing and all those things, that we're taking the fun out of it. So I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, what's not fun about competing? And what's not fun about trying to win?
Okay, let's take some steps backward about competition and winning. Clearly, kids, probably around the age of 4 or 5, that's when they cognitively begin to understand winning versus losing. And they can see that there's a lot more benefits to being on a winning team or being the victor than being on a losing squad. And the parents, all of us, love the fact that our child shows not only some athletic ability, but also that they seem to be excited about it. And so we naturally give them a lot of praise, which is fine, as they begin to learn how to master skills, whether it's learning how to kick a soccer ball first with one foot then the other, or shooting a basketball into a hoop. But they take those early years, they need to develop skills. And they do so by saying that they're getting mom and dad's approval. As they get into organized sports, let's say, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, and now they see how they stack up against their peers. And let's say it's soccer, all of a sudden they can see they can kick a soccer ball and run after it and dominate and put the ball in the net. And the parents love this. And bit by bit by bit, the kids get into it. But when you start to prevail and show that you have the markings of being a pretty good athlete, what happens is that the moms and dads, not on purpose, but they begin to put a certain level of expectation on the child. And over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years, as the child continues to grow through sports and competes, there's always a little more pressure. It gets a little turned up every year. Well, you're really good against the kids just on the rec program, but now there's a travel program, and this is the next level up, and all the kids are good. So we want you, if you want to go out and do this and compete, do so with our blessing. But as you do this, the kids begin to say, well, this is a little tougher. Yet I still have an obligation to go out and perform at a higher level. And I'm convinced, again, this is not about pushy parents or helicopter parents. It's just about being a good parent. But I'm convinced as kids get to a little older, 7, 8, 9 now, when you drop your son or daughter off, again, at a travel program, and they have a game that day, and the last thing you say to the youngster is they leave the family station wagon or whatever, SUV, you say, go out and have fun. But we really don't mean that. what we mean to say, we don't say it, is go out and be a star. Why do we say that, or mean to say it? Because when the game is over and your young soccer player gets back in your car, invariably you say, nice game, you're great out there, and then you start what I call the PGA, the post-game analysis, which is like going through being grilled by the New York City sports media. Well, how come you had that easy shot towards the end of the first half and you muffed it? How come you didn't just hammer the ball into the net? Or how come the coach had you playing fullback instead of being a midfielder? And the kid begins to realize it had nothing to do with that having fun. I'm getting a real grilling here as to what I did wrong or could have done better during the course of the game. And again, the expectations that build a certain sense of frustration, of tension in the child. And yeah, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, this is the problem. If you always are about winning, always about what's wrong with always winning all the time, the child begins to say, this is not fun. I'm basically getting a performance review every time I play a game. And after a while, the kid begins to say, maybe I should do something else rather than just play soccer or whatever sport may be.
So what should parents say to their kids after the game?
First thing is, you have to automatically, no matter what kind of game they've had, good, bad, or indifferent, you have to be supportive, excited about it, make them feel that they really did a great job out there. And specifically, if you're going to find something during the course of the game that you can actually point to, say, gee, you showed tremendous hustle when you raced back on defense and you were able to, get in front of the attacker and block the ball. That was really amazing. Everybody thought it was terrific. Or something that's really that they can remember. And then if you get them to talk about individual play, then you really hit a home run, because now they're engaged. Yeah, that was really cool. If I'd ever catch up to that kid who's so fast, I dove in the last second and blocked the ball. Now they're talking. You always want them to talk. And you do that by just sort of prompting them with some real positive images of what happened during the course of that affair. But you never criticize. And of course, we're all human. We've all done this, myself included. You figure, like, what better time than the game just ended a few minutes ago, while the game is still fresh in your kid's head. That's the time to really point out the mistakes that he or she made. And that's exactly not the right time to do it. You want to do it later on in the evening, and again, you have to be very subtle about this. The game is long forgotten. You give them what I call a praise sandwich, which is pretty well known. You give them a thin slice of praise and how well they did in a certain part of the game. You give them a little bit of constructive criticism that will help them get them better, and a little more praise. You do it all in 30 seconds, and I guarantee you it has a big, big impact on the child. But there's no need. You never want to be seen by your child as being there pushing, or even if you feel it's done subconsciously, don't be pushing your kid. Let the motivation come from inside them. I assume it's true, okay? But it has, remember, your child is always seeking your approval. If you watch the games closely, I'm sure you all do, you'll watch your youngster, particularly at a young age, they will look from the field or the court or from the rink to see you in the stands, to see if you're paying attention. And they make a particularly good play, they're looking over to you with a quick glance to see if you watch what they just did, because they're looking for your approval, which is fine. And if you talk to them after a game, and they crawl back in the car, and you just say, you know what, I just love watching you play. And you say it just like that with great authority and great sincerity. That's all you got to say. That's all they want to hear. Because that's what, especially the early stages, that's why they're doing this. As they get older and develop more skill, get more confidence, more mastery in their abilities, you don't have to keep saying that so much, even it's probably still true. But they're just glad to know you're there and watching and paying attention.
As I mentioned, Rick, people, maybe you had seen, maybe some of you were here, we had asked for people to contribute some questions. And before we get into a couple of them, I wanted to actually talk to you, or raise a question about the questions themselves. I forwarded them on to Rick, and they're all very compelling questions, and it's very clear that parents are very passionate about this topic, very passionate, and it's very emotional. And some of the questions were, from my perspective, were very clearly directed at a particular person, whether it was a coach or a league or an administrator. They didn't use their names, but it's very clear that this was a forum for them to perhaps bring up an issue that they may not have been comfortable bringing up elsewhere. Now, most people want to avoid conflict, and sometimes when you have coaches who are either parents or members of your community, or you see them a lot, it can be very uncomfortable to raise these issues. So are there suggestions, best practices, what's your experience been in helping parents and coaches and league presidents and boards to communicate during the season, so it's not just, oh, I'm going to unload on the coach in the postseason survey kind of thing?
Well, yeah, and this is, I do a lot of speaking events like these all around the country. And invariably, no matter where I go, whether it's Dallas or Tampa or Spokane or around here, invariably the person who hosts the presentation will say, Rick, in this town, we take our youth sports pretty seriously. And I'm still looking for that one town that doesn't take it seriously. But the truth is, a lot of this can be solved or prevented through common sense. And I'm a big believer in communication, particularly before the season begins. If you're coaching a youth team or even a high school varsity team, it is so essential that before the season begins, you're going to have a team meeting, which is mandatory. Well, I'm out of town that weekend, or no, I'm not going to. No, you must be there. And you give the parents enough time, a warning, so they can work out their schedule. But at that meeting, the coaches have to get up and have a handout, for that matter, and say, here's how we're going to do this. This is my coaching philosophy. This is how we're going to do this year. I advocate, particularly at the younger levels, that the coaches make it clear that everybody will get pretty much equal playing time. Because if winning the fourth grade league championship in girls basketball is the biggest thing in your life, you may want to take a step back, The point is that you want to make sure the parents are on the same page, and most importantly, you sit down and you say, look, this is how, if you have to talk to me about some issue that crops up with your son or daughter during the course of the year, you can either reach me, here's my email. If you want to, you can text me, but I will ask this in exchange, that please do not send me an email that goes on for pages and pages. Try to limit your comments to maybe 300 words. Don't text me endlessly, and if you do really need to talk to me in person, basically contact me, and maybe we'll set up a time when you come in to talk to me for a few minutes in private, or at some other situation where we'll have some privacy. Whatever you do, please do not talk to me or complain to me before a game, during a game, like at halftime, or right after the game. That's not fair, because I'm responsible for all the kids in the team. But I am open, and I'm here to talk to you. Just use a little sense of parameters. Now, I'll give you a little tip if you're the coach. If you know you got some parent who is really steaming and really wants to get in your face about something, you basically say, look, if you want, come talk to me, or we can talk to me after a practice. And then make sure all the kids have gone, whatever. And then after the practice, let's say, you give that parent, come over, give them a good 5 or 10 minutes to really get it out of their system. And just let them vent their spleen on you for 10 minutes. You sit there, you make eye contact, you don't interrupt them. And at the end of 10 minutes, after they feel like they really had their say, say, well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me, Mr. Smith. I appreciate that greatly. I'll take your comments and suggestions under advisement. And that's all I have to say. You don't make any promises about more playing time for your kid. You don't make any promises about putting his kid in a different position. You just say, I hear you, and if the parent still wants to go on with this, you say, I've heard you for 10 minutes. Forgive me, I have my own family to attend to. I've heard you, thank you, then you walk. Because if you find yourself, and you will, there'll be times where you want to defend yourself, and your blood pressure goes up, and you feel like you want to shout back at that parent. You never want to do that, because it's the old saying, if you fight with a skunk, you both end up smelling. So you got to have the personal discipline to give the parent a chance to vent what they have to say. Thank you very much, appreciate it. You do it in a very sincere way, and then you go your own way. So that's just little tidbits of how you have to communicate with moms and dads. Now, it's a whole continuum. If a kid is a junior in high school and has an issue about something with a coach, this is part of the maturation process. You want your son or daughter to say, I'm going to go talk to the coach on my own. There's no place for mom and dad at that age to come there and act as the advocate for the kid. When it's different when the kid's 8 or 9, the kid's 16 or 17, come on. This is preparation for life. Stand on your own 2 feet and talk to the coach. So I don't like coaches who say, I don't want to hear from your parents, I don't want to talk to them, I don't want to do anything. Those coaches are done. They're dinosaurs. There are a few of them still around, but they're not going to be around much longer. It's much easier and much better to have this open source of communication. So that's my advice not only for the parents, but for the coaches as well.
We, in the basketball league and also in other leagues, I think we have this idea that we want to maybe make our kids grow up a little bit faster than they should. So I wanted to touch upon what you just said is, maybe this is more from a psychological development point of view. When is it appropriate to tell your son or daughter, I'm not here to stand up and fight your battles. If you've got an issue, you should be the one who talks to your coach first, and then if that doesn't help, then you can come to me.
It all depends, of course, on the maturation level of the child. But I would say that by the time the kid is a freshman, certainly by the time they're a sophomore, and they're going to be intimidated, because not only are they going up against an adult, but obviously that adult, that coach, is the one that controls their life, in sports. So I do think the kid should at least make an attempt, and I also advocate or suggest that the youngster basically, in effect, rehearse their speech. What exactly do you want to ask of the coach? Make sure the words are clear, and give the coach a chance to respond, and tell your son or daughter to listen very, very carefully as to what the words are from the coach. Obviously, if there's still a disconnect and things don't improve or don't change, then at that point, maybe the parent can request a chance to talk with the coach. But that's more of an extreme situation. You would like to have your son or daughter work these things out on their own.
Okay. I am going to look for my glasses, which I can't find. All right, here's a question. I'm just going to read this one.
Is your question?
On the floor? But at least they weren't on my head. Okay. All right. What is the best way to help your child handle the emotional impact of a coach who is a bully, uses profanity, belittles players, and breaks league rules? Both the coach and his superiors may have been aware of these issues, but the poor behavior has still continued. How do I help my child who wants to play deal with this kind of coach? So it's a bullying coach who's, how do parents deal with that?
Well,
come on, Rick.
Don't bully me here. There have been some positive changes in coaching in the last few years. And one of them is the eradication of coaches who are bullies. Again, they're not all gone yet, but you're seeing more and more pressure being exerted, and there's a trickle-down effect from the college level. I'm sure many of you read about Mike Rice, the coach at Rutgers men's basketball, who was on videotape not only verbally abusing his players, but also physically throwing basketball at them and pushing kids around. That's just idiotic and unacceptable and downright shameful. And finally, Rutgers, fired him. But that's had a ripple effect all across the country. Again, not just at the college level, but even at the high school level. I grew up at a time when Bobby Knight was godlike. But even those of us who looked at Bobby Knight from afar said, this guy's a screwball. And who wants to play for a guy who's just mean-spirited to his players? So the good news of this is that we're now beginning to see more and more athletic directors, coaches, or I should say parents, who have kids who play for these kind of coaches, who are now getting rid of these guys. If you can't coach without screaming and yelling and bullying your players, then you shouldn't be around kids. You don't need that. I mean, I don't understand it. I guess there are a lot of coaches today who grew up idolizing, again, Bobby Knight or Bill Parcells or Vince Lombardi. Those guys are long gone. That's not how you coach anymore. If you look at some of the premier coaches and baseball managers of our time, I mean, you ever saw Joe Torre go nuts at a player in the dugout? He was calm, cool, collected. I'm sure he was angry, upset, but you never saw it on his face. It's just different time and place. So I do think if you've got a bully of a coach, that is not only, that's crossed the line. And you do have a right at that point as a parent to go and talk to the board or talk to the athletic director and say, this is really unacceptable. And I think you'll find some tremendous support for making the change. So yeah, you can't allow that. You can't allow your kid to be a victim.
Thank you for that. Not a counter to that, but a question that might be raised is, what if you get a bunch of parents who just don't like a coach and want to, say he or she is a bully and for various reasons and decide that they're going to put pressure? At some point, is there a he said, she said interpretation?
Yeah.
What could be bullying is actually just a coach trying to get the best out of his or her player, and maybe it's just a kid or something like that. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances here.
Dave, that's where you get into a gray area because, you are coaches, or parents would say, well, the coach just really belittles my kid, and my kid comes home and cries and feels terrible about themselves, but the coach is not picking on the kid. That's just the way he or she is coaching the team. It's a tough disciplinary type of approach. That's where the athletic director, and ultimately it's the AD's call, because he or she made the hire of the coach, has to be aware, has to see what's going on. And if the AD, in their professional opinion, feels that the coach is within the boundaries of just being a tough coach and not a bully, then that's fine. And the parents can go in and talk to the AD and say, I think we've got a problem here. But the AD says, I have watched numerous practices, I've watched numerous games, I've been in the locker room. Coach is tough, he's demanding, but he's not a bully. And then parents have to say, okay, we understand, and go back and talk to the kid and say, you've got a tough coach. But that's all part of this new aura, if you will, era of what we're doing with kids today. We try to look out for them, we try to take care of them, we try to be helicopter parents. But when you have a third party coming in saying, this is how it's going to be, you're going to run, you're going to do sprints, I want you here on time. And they're tough, that's how they coach. That's different than being a bully or being sarcastic to a kid or singling out a youngster to really humiliate them in front of the team. That's bullying. And all the laws in all the states now about bullying, any educator has to report bullying to the authorities. So the teachers and coaches should be very much aware of these new kind of restrictions.
Demeaning kids, sarcasm in particular.
Sarcasm does not work. Particularly the younger the child is. Kids at a young age, 12 and under, they don't understand sarcasm. And they don't know, are you making fun of me? Is this a joke? I don't get this, and it just crushes their ego. But even at the high school level, sarcasm is like a dagger to a kid, and they don't like to be singled out. And as I said, it can be construed as being bullying, but regardless, common sense, if you're a coach, you want your kids to rise up and to unify. They don't want, if you humiliate them or make fun of them or make them do ridiculous tasks, you're making them feel small, and that's the worst thing you want to do. So sarcasm doesn't work. In fact, it's counterproductive.
Someone wrote, this is a little bit of a longer question here. It may not even be a question. It's a statement about our times, and I want to read it to you. There is little to no family time for families that have more than one child. Parents need to divide up and get their children to their practices and games on Saturdays and Sundays. Given the fact that the family, both nuclear and extended, provide a child with their basic sense of security, Don't you feel it's damaging to a child to not know that sense of security that most of us had growing up? Shouldn't Monday through Saturday be enough? Should we have our families split up on fields 7 days a week, Mother's Day, Father's Day, over vacation breaks? Shouldn't our children have a day of rest and time to reconnect with their families? Childhood anxiety is at an all-time high. Why can't our children have the joy and benefit of participating in a school sport which benefits them physically and socially without having the stress of not having time to rest or connect with their whole families? I believe this is where we should look and see that this is why our children are becoming disconnected. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot there. A couple of thoughts. There's a famous study that's been around for a number of years out of Michigan State, which says that by the time kids turn 13, 74% of them who play sports will quit.
74% by 13.
Yeah, 3 out of 4. Now, that's a devastating number. You can make a case that by the time they're 13, they're in middle school, a lot of kids would just kind of walk away from sports to attrition because they found other things they enjoy in life, whether it's music or theater or whatever. That's fine. And we expect that, but not 3 out of 4. And I think it's because by the time kids are now 12 or 13, they've been playing sports endlessly, 365 days a year, with all the expectations that accompany that. Going to practice for travel teams, trying out for travel teams, and so on and so forth, that the kids say, I just want to take the time out, and I'm burned out. Because they want to do other things. They want to have sleepovers or go to birthday parties, whatever they want to do. They're tired of playing sports. So you'll find with a lot of moms and dads and families who have kids who are particularly talented athletes, they will make sure that the year is not consumed with just one game, one practice after another. That they do have the child take time off. Consciously say, well, you're not going to skate for the month of August. You're not going to go to soccer camp, in July, because they know the kid needs some time to recharge the batteries. A term that didn't exist when I was growing up, which I'm sure you're all aware of now, is called repetitive use injuries. That's a new phenomenon. It's only because the kids are playing sports all the time. So I agree with the person who wrote that note, that the parent has to instill some common sense and say, stop, take time off, relax, be a kid. Because if you lose that, we think our kids love to play. But if you're playing every day, then play becomes work. And when it's work, I got to go to soccer practice, I got to travel till the weekend. That's when you lose kids. Because when the kid does burn out, they never come back to that sport again. They're just done. So I do think it's up to the moms and dads to figure out a way to balance the idea of playing a sport, taking time off. The ideal if your kid plays different sports to refresh and again to get a different feel for different activities. But those days, of course, are pretty rare. So
74%, wow.
yeah, that's true.
Okay, so here's a question that has to do with people who run youth sports associations. And I want to be clear that I'm not ducking any questions here tonight. We addressed this particular issue at the Basketball Association by not having any parent coaches at the travel level, except for 4th grade, which is sort of the entry level. But doesn't mean we've got it perfect either. What advice do you have for dealing with politics and self-serving behavior in youth sports, such as sports associations that allow parents of current players to serve on boards of organizations they're supposed to be overseeing? So just an inherent conflict of interest of parents on boards where their kids are playing.
I went through this myself. My kids were playing youth sports. And if you're coaching your kid on your team, you just have to assume that every other parent of kids on that team know right away you're going to play favoritism, and it's going to be nepotism. Your kid is going to bat third, your kid's going to be the self-appointed captain, your kid's going to go all-league team. I mean, they all assume that. And if you don't assume that, you're being unbelievably naive. Even worse, if your kid's playing in the league and you're on the board, same thing. People say, oh, come on, how level can this be? Because the kid got his father or mother on the board. I mean, it's just, you got to have a blanket wall. That can't happen. I remember my son was probably 10, and he was playing youth league baseball in our town. And I guess we had maybe opening day, the typical town parade and so on and so forth. And my son was a good baseball player. And we carried probably 15, 14 kids on the roster. So opening day, everybody's out, the mayor of the town, the band, and here's the lineup. And I said to John, I said, I got 14 kids on this roster, and only 9 can play at a time. Yeah, what's your point? I said, well, you're not going to start. Dead. Why? Why? That's not fair to me. So because I got 9 kids who can play, and I got 14 in the roster, and we're going to rotate, but you're not going to start this game. I hope they get you in maybe the 4th inning, but you're not going to play the first, 3. But deep, and of course he was upset, but deep down in my heart, I knew that I was trying to get a message across to all the other parents of all the other kids on my team that, well, maybe this Wolff isn't such a bad guy after all. He's not even starting his own kid on opening day. Because I knew that everybody's looking at me thinking, clearly this is a guy who's going to play favorites and make sure his kid gets the choice, the positions to play, and so on and so forth. So yes, it's just a really good idea to have a blanket rule that, on the boards, nobody has, if you're on the board, you don't have any kids playing in the league. I have another thing to this as well, Dan, that board members only last for 2 years, because you let them down for more than 2 years, a lot of things begin to happen in internal politics. And 3, if you are going to have a team in which you're going to coach your own kid, well, be very, very careful and heed my words about people thinking you're going to play favorites. In fact, the first thing you do is you ask your son or daughter, would you like to have your father coach your team this year? That's the first thing you ask. Some kids will say, no, I don't want you to coach. That's their decision. Does that help clarify it all?
You bring up a lot of issues for certainly our small town, because we've got parents who are on the board. Our board, I've got 2 kids in the program. I think every single, because you get involved in these sports because your kids are playing, and you know that you need people to step up, so to speak, and run these things. They're all volunteer organizations, and so if you had to recuse yourself because your kid was in it, it would have an impact on the league. So it's a really interesting topic to
well, put it this way. I understand it's a relatively small town. However, at least have the conversation and have a sense of awareness so that you guys are talking about this openly, saying, we've got to be careful. I'm getting some feedback that maybe some decisions are being made as to how things are done, and maybe there's too much slanting towards nepotism. One of the biggest bugaboos I've had for years is when you have the selection process. And I have no idea how you guys do it with this town, so maybe I'll be, tarred and feathered after this meeting. But when they get together to choose up teams for youth baseball, and you say, well, we have coaches, the fathers get together, and they've done their own sort of scouting reports. And I've always suggested, why don't you all get the guys together, all of the coaches together, get a blackboard, and have the guys sit around and take all the players, and you rank all the players, and you put them into, 6 teams in this town. And at the end of the 6 teams, they're all well balanced. Every team's got a good pitcher, who's got a catcher, whatever. And then you ask all the coaches, okay, does everybody think these 6 teams are equal? And you have a consensus, say fine. Then you have everybody's name, or the coach's name, you throw them into a cap, and everybody pulls out a name for each team. And nobody then can say, oh, I got team 3, that team sucks. Well, no, 5 minutes ago we said we're all balanced. Yeah, but that team, that team, everything. So that way we're looking for parity. Nobody should be able to complain that one team is stronger than the other, and basically you go from there. I want the ideal situation with any sports team is everybody is 500. You win half your games, you lose half your games. You don't want to have a situation where one team is dominating, one team is losing all the games. So those are my caution is have an awareness of this so that you guys can talk about it openly and freely.
Okay. I'm sure everyone's going to have a lot of questions for Rick, and I hope we do, and we'll get someone to bring the mic around. But before we got to Q&A, I wanted to bring Noah Savage up on stage. Noah's going to talk about a number of things, having been a player and a coach and has gone through the system, has been recruited. And I'm going to stand up so everyone sees how tall he is and how tall I am. There you go, Noah. Noah and I know each other for a long time. My older brother Howard, you guys probably know, played and coached at Princeton, and he was an assistant coach for a long time, and for a number of head coaches, including John Thompson Jr., and he played for Pete Carrill and a couple of other guys, but Noah was one of the players on the team at that point, and it turns out Noah grew up here, and one of his buddies is John Anderson, who's one of our coaches, and so it's a kind of a family feel here. So Noah, thanks for coming up tonight.
And before you start to grill Noah, let me just say this, because I've been talking mostly about the youth level and middle school, high school. Noah's going to talk about, since he is sort of a native son here in Weston, about what happens as you go up the ladder. Because you've heard about the pyramid of athletics, and you climb up to the next level. It is a different process, and it changes all the time. It's much different than it was just 10, 20 years ago. And as you go up that ladder, and Noah will talk about the guys he played against and getting recruited and so on and so forth, understand this. All sports parents would love to have a son like Noah and say, wow, this kid is just on a rocket ship, you know? But the fact of the matter is, think about Weston High School. How many kids here, the graduating class, and I have no idea, how many kids here get Division I scholarships? Maybe a handful, that many every year? Two? Right? All right, that's a lot.
5 in the last 15 years.
Okay.
Big time.
And, you know, unless you're playing basketball or football, that scholarship money is going to be sliced and diced, because soccer programs don't make any money, you know, track and field, gymnastics, there's no money in these sports. So it's all supported by football and basketball. I mean, when I coached at Mercy College, I actually had 9 full scholarships a year to find out great baseball players. But there are 70 high schools in Westchester County. I don't know how many there are in Fairfield County. I don't know how many other in Nassau and Suffolk. But I can pick and choose whoever I wanted and say, I'll have you come to Mercy and play baseball, I'll pay you away. It was a great, great ability to do that. But the reality is, there's so many kids who are all league and, you know, all county and all this and all that. Coaches are all about winning at the college level, and they want kids, they pick and choose who they want. So when you get to that level, it's a whole different ballgame. And with that little preface, back to you, Dave.
So Noah, tell us.
Can you hear me first of all? All right.
Yeah. Tell us about climbing up the ladder. What was it like
So,
playing here?
Yeah. So I lived here from about 2nd grade to 8th grade, and I started playing in the just rec league within the town. And then we had tryouts in 5th grade for the travel team, and I made the team. A couple of my friends didn't make the team, and then I didn't talk to them anymore. That was like the first big eye-opener, that like some people are not going to make this process. You know, this 5th grade, and some guys are on the travel team, and you get the sweatsuits, and some guys are going to play baseball or whatever, you know. So, you know, I started playing AAU pretty early in 6th grade, mainly because I wanted to continue playing basketball year-round. I mean, it came from me. And I hear a lot about exposure now in AAU. I've coached maybe 3 or 4 AAU teams, and guys are talking about exposure, you know, when they're 11. And that was for who? Like, who are you getting exposed to at age 11? For me, it came from me. I wanted to play year-round. And when it got to the point that I was skipping Little League games to play AAU practices, then I stopped playing baseball. And I know a lot of people talk about specializing too early and all that. And, you know, that's an issue that I'm sure Rick can talk a lot about. But for me, I specialized because that's what I wanted to do. You know, I never played a sport in the fall, and then I would play basketball winter all the way through August, and then I would take August off in the fall, from about age 11 all the way through high school. At the high school level, I played for Princeton High School for 3 years, and then I transferred to Hun, which is in the Maple League in New Jersey, and pretty elite league. I played against Luol Deng and Charlie Villanueva, who were on the same team in high school. J.R. Smith was on another team that we played against, St. Pat, St. Benedict's. Every team had 5 or 6 D1 guys. I mean, that was like the kind of the level that we were at, and then I was fortunate enough to play at Princeton and then play professionally overseas. So, you know, the first thing I wanted to stress is that all that came from me. My parents never said, you have to play Division I college basketball. You have to try to play in Europe, be in the NBA. I wanted to play and I loved it. And everything that came out of that was from my desire to get better and asking them, where else can I play? What else can I do?
So the course of from young youth sports all the way through playing for tens of fans, as you said. You played for, about how many coaches you played for?
I played for 2 high school coaches. I was recruited by John Thompson at Princeton, and then I played for Joe Scott and Sidney Johnson, who's now at Fairfield, and about 4 or 5 AAU coaches, and a middle school coach for about 3 years, so probably 8 to 10. And then a coach in Europe who didn't speak English. So just the whole myriad of coaches.
So talk about the variety, because we've talked about bullying coaches, nice coaches, old school coaches, new coaches. You know, how did that affect you as a player? What's your observations about coaching, coaches, and how you adapted or needed to adapt to different personalities of coaches?
Yeah, well, I think I did. I played for, coaches that I think, my experience with them liking me was very polarizing. I was either like their favorite player they've ever coached in their life, and there's like a plaque of me on their wall, or they couldn't stand me. I mean, it was really like a bipolar experience. And, I think that speaks to just how you can either click with someone or you can. And I played for guys who were former players who looked like they could still play. And I played for a guy at Princeton who, in my opinion, was a big-time bully, who was a real challenge. And I always looked at it as, how am I going to get the most out of my experience? How am I going to get the most playing time? And I just handled it from a survivalist point of view of what can I do in this situation, whether it was really tough or whether I really liked the coach was kind of irrelevant to what my goals were in terms of getting a lot of playing time and playing well. And nobody ever gives you a survey at the end of the season when you're playing D1 college basketball, how much did you like your coach? They're making hundreds of $1,000s at a minimum to coach you, and that's their life, and they're not going to be the nicest. I actually know Mike Rice really well, and when that video came out for the layman or for someone who's never been in a D1 practice, you go, that's shocking. But for me, my reaction was 80% of the coaches in America do 80% of what was on that video. So not to the extreme that was on the video, but there's banners to people all around this country who are getting millions of dollars who are consistently abusive. But that's D1. There's a difference if you're getting a scholarship and you're on a Nike school. There's a line that's different than if it's your 8th grade AAU team or if it's your 5th grade travel team. I think there's a line, and I think people would be shocked what really goes on the higher up you go. And then in Europe, when you're playing professionally in Europe or in the NBA, it doesn't matter if you like the coach or not. They'll pack your bags. You have a bad game, you're gone. Like that's the level it gets to. So you deal with the coach in terms of how am I not going to get cut and how am I going to make it to the end of the season.
How about, Rick, I had my own experience growing up with my parents. Rick talked about his parents not necessarily being around to watch all of his games unless in high school. What was it like with you and your parents? When did they start watching? What was their role in your youth sports growing up?
Well, I think they watched a lot, and my mom and dad were so into it that they didn't sit together at the games. They sat at like opposite ends of the stadium because the way they cheered was different. And again, it wasn't pressure from them. It was, if you want to do this, here's what you have to do. It's a lot of conversations like that. If you don't want to play, if it's too hard, it's fine. But we know your goal is to play D1. We know your goal is to play professionally. So if you want to, you have to play better, or you have to do this. There's a lot of, if you still want to do this, when it got really tough. My stepdad was a real maniac in terms of New Jersey high school basketball when I moved down to New Jersey. And he would look at the player rankings each month that he got mailed to him. And if I was number 31 in the state instead of number 29 the last month, it was a big deal. And I would be like, nobody cares. Like, really, nobody cares at all. But, one thing I will say is that when I got recruited at Princeton, I got recruited at Yale and Princeton around the same time. And the Yale coaches brought me around the whole facility, and they kept showing me cast iron heads of people who are alums and pictures, and they go, this guy makes $15 million a year, and I'm like, I don't know who that guy is or whatever. And here's our weight room, we do Olympic lifting, and oh my God, and state of the art this. And when I sat down with John Thompson, he said, look, we want you to play here, but we don't really think you're good enough. That was it. That was his recruiting pitch. And I said, you know, Princeton's a great place to play, but you have to at least meet my mom before I agree to play here. And do you have a weight room? Like, he didn't show me anything. And later I found that they viewed that as a real positive, that I didn't bring my parents, that I was like representing myself. I was a man. I was saying, I'm going to make this decision. And that wasn't something that I planned out. That was just the way, it was my thing, you know, that I went about it. So I know that parents who are overbearing, even in the recruiting process, can hurt you. And I don't think they've ever helped, but I know they can hurt you.
Let me jump in here because I mentioned before I had coached as head coach of a Division II college baseball team. And I always felt kind of guilty about this, but when I went to the recruiting process, invariably the kid would come in with the parents. And I would sit him down and I would say, Mr. Levy, let me tell you something about your son. He's just the kind of young man we love to have here at Mercer College because he's obviously been well taught, he's well mannered, seems like a great personality. Really, he'd just be an absolute wonderful addition to have here at school. I'd love to have him come. And of course, parents, wow, you know, this is great. And of course, the kid has got the big head because he's here in one of the. I never said anything about whether he's going to make the team or not, or any scholarship money, or if he's going to start, but I said nice things about it. And that's how the process goes. I mean, I know you're recruited by these schools, and parents all the time get excited when maybe the kid, sophomore, junior year, they start getting some form letters. That's not being recruited.
Right, yeah.
Get into that.
So the first high school I played at was Princeton High School in the town of Princeton. It was very academically motivated, and nobody cared about sports, basically, for the short story. And so when I started getting letters, I was about 15, and I would get maybe 12 to 15 letters every day to the high school, to my coach, and kind of to make a statement to everyone else that sports mattered. He would come into my 8th period class with a stack of letters and be like, hey, Noah, here's your letters in front of everybody. And be like, look how many kids want this guy. You guys don't even come to the games, you know, like to make a statement. Now, with that in mind, I got a letter every day for 3 years from the University of Virginia. I got a letter every day from Penn State. I got a letter every day from Providence. So I'm like, oh yeah, Big East, ACC, Big Ten, like this is what's up. Now, after your sophomore year, when they can first start calling you, after you get all these letters, nobody called me from Virginia, nobody called me from Penn State, and nobody called me from Providence. Now, they wrote me every day. They signed them in handwritten letters. Hey, heard about your game, blah, blah, blah. Look what we're doing in our program. And I had stacks of hundreds of letters by the end of the day. So to contrast that with another school, which might be a little bit unique, I think Princeton sent me one letter. But they were like, look, you're right in our town, we're just going to offer you or not. There wasn't a process, but the way it goes is you get letters if you get on any list. You get a letter. No, great, get a letter, who cares? If you get a phone call, they might know who you are actually, they might have seen you play. If they're calling you every day and it's junior year, then they might want you and you still might not get an offer. I had a coach from Rice call me every day for about 6 months. No offer on the table, and then my dad actually called him, and it turned out they offered another kid, and I was like second or third on the list, and I'd already committed to another school, so there's no reason for him to blow smoke at that point. But I had another coach call me that I'd never met to offer me a scholarship over the phone from University of Buffalo. So it's really bizarre, the process, and until you're signing with the school, you're not, or you're getting an official visit. You only get 5 official visits. Once you do one of those, then they're really recruiting you. But there's a long stretch between getting a letter and actually getting a scholarship offer.
Well, you had said outside, Noah, that you recently coached an AAU team in Stanford. And you talked about parents asking you, okay, so what do I need to do to get my kid into a Division I program?
Right, and
what's your answer?
Well, I get a lot of emails of people trying to network their way into Princeton basketball or something, right? Which is, and they'll be like, hey, I know this kid, he's averaging 7 points a game, he's a junior on the JV, he's got an A- average. Maybe you can tell the Princeton coaches about him. And what I always say is what he should do is become the best player ever at his high school. And then maybe they'll want him. Because that's I played with 3 guys who are the all-time leading scorers in their town who didn't get off the bench. And that's not Kentucky, that's Princeton. I mean, that's how good you have to be to play at a very, medium to low level Division I.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up too, because most parents, sports parents, and we're talking about the high school recruiting level, the vast majority of sports parents have never seen in person just how good the kids are at a Division I program. As Noah says, there are kids on the bench who never get into a game, have to go to every practice, and practices run all year, but they had great high school careers, I mean superior high school careers, but they never get off the bench. And again, that's Ivy League, it's all over the place. I remember when my son was going through the college process, and he was a pretty good ice hockey player, and he said, well, yeah, I'm looking at hockey in college. I said, let's go watch a Division III ice hockey game, because he'd never seen a Division III ice hockey. And so we went to see like an Amherst Wesleyan game, and he was like stunned and amazed at how great these guys were in Division III. And none of these guys are going to the NHL, but until you have it. So my point is, when your kids think they're going to play sports in college, make sure you go and spend some time, have them go and to a practice. Because most parents think that Division III sports is like intramural, like it's just a step up after being a senior, and after all, my kid was a star in high school. No, Division III is unbelievably, it's a quantum leap. To get to D1, I mean, yeah, every kid in that team you play with, I'm sure, had a tremendous high school resume.
Right, and you can't underrate luck kind of in this process too, because as a guy who couldn't run, couldn't jump, if I'm 6'2", I'm sitting here talking about my career at Babson or something. It's not, you can't, half the scholarships for D1 basketball in the country go to guys 6'5" and over. And it's only 0.2% of everybody who plays high school basketball. So if you're under 6'5" and you want to play D1 college basketball, you've got a 0.2% statistical chance of getting there. And that's just to kind of like throw that out there. And there's nothing wrong with playing D3, but that's kind of like the reality.
Yeah, it is the reality.
Many years ago, you coached a young man in Princeton named Levy, who happens to be my nephew, who's bigger than me. He's 6'8", and he plays at Franklin and Marshall. Or should I say, he's on the team at Franklin and Marshall. You would see this kid, you would say, he's a star. He got in a couple games freshman year. He's a sophomore. They happen to be having a great year. He gets in a little bit, but if you would just go to a game, Division III, so Lancaster, Pennsylvania, you see that league, the Colonial League, I think it's called. It's not the club, but it's incredibly competitive. And you get there and you see that a 6'8" kid is riding the pines because he's behind two other 6'7" kids and another 6'3" kid who is shooting the lights out. And I think it's a good pull.
They're going to wonder just how good they can go and make it to the next level. And you don't want to discourage them, obviously, but you got to sort of show them the real world of what it's all about, because it is at the collegiate level, as Noah was saying, these coaches who make real money, they're there to win, and they really don't care that you were a star in high school or that hurt your feelings, you're not playing much. They want to maintain their job status, and they're going to play who they think can help them win games. And if they're getting a scholarship, well, their attitude is, well, at least you're still getting your way paid through school. But it's very competitive. We often lose sight of how many millions of talented kids are in this country who all have the same dream. And I think the NCAA says that less than 4% of all high school varsity athletes ever make a team in Division I, II, or III. So that means that more than 96% of all your high school athletes are done after their last game of the senior year.